I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. When Labor came to power, it promised to clean up politics, to end the jobs for mates culture once and for all. But this week, the government quietly released the report it's been sitting on for more than 2 years, and it's not a great look. The No Favourites review found an appointment system riddled with nepotism, where friends are given jobs as rewards for loyalty. And when it finally saw the light of day, it landed with all the energy of a Yes Minister episode. Open government in name only. Today, Press Gallery journalist Karen Middleton on the government's integrity problem and why transparency always seems to be the last priority. It's Saturday, December 6th. Karen, good to see you again. Take us back to when the review was first commissioned. What was Labor promising to do about so-called jobs for mates?
Well, Daniel, they were going to restore integrity to the system. This review was announced in early February of 2023, and Katie Gallagher, the Finance Minister, who's responsible for the public service, was the one who announced it. Now, there's kind of an interesting backstory to that in that at the time, independent Teal MP Sophie Scamps from New South Wales was drafting a bill, a private member's bill, to do something similar for transparency and accountability with direct ministerial appointments aimed at cleaning up the system of appointing people to government boards and other government agencies. Now, the interesting thing there is the timeline here. Sophie Scamps had a meeting with the then Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, on the 31st of January 2023, indicating she was drafting this bill and going to put it into Parliament. And the government announced this review 5 days later. Now, governments don't like private members' bills. They generally kibosh them, and that is what happened in this case. But the government stepped in and said, we're doing this wonderful thing. So by the time the bill got into Parliament in the March, a month later, the review was already underway. But then 2 years and 4 months later, we finally saw the report, which Katie Gallagher had promised at the time would be released in a timely way, and that was all about the government's commitment to transparency. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there.
And so the report was handed to them bang on time, and as you just said, they've sat on it for about 2.5 years. What made them decide to finally release it now, though?
Well, the Senate forced them to do that, basically. Independent Senator David Coch led the charge for that in the Senate.
We need to have an honest conversation about what it means when you have a government that refuses to be transparent, that seems to forget who they're actually in here to work for, that is stifling the ability of the Senate to actually be the House of Review, to hold the government to account.
And Katie Gallagher waited until the morning that we were having Senate estimates hearings. She released that report a couple of hours before those hearings began. So there was some grumbling from the crossbench and others that they hadn't had enough time to look at it.
Well, I've complied with the order of the Senate.
I haven't finished asking my question. In order for them to upload those articles on time this morning, they would have had to have the report yesterday. Senators did not have the report yesterday. We've only now had the benefit of it this morning, knowing the APSC is appearing now. Would have been helpful to us to have it yesterday too, as journalists did, so we could prepare for our questions.
So you did get the impression that they had to sort of be dragged to making this public, and Katie Gallagher did that while also releasing a new government framework on handling appointments.
And in her report, what sort of picture did Linnell Briggs paint about how appointments are made by the government?
Well, it was pretty damning. It's important, I think, to note that this wasn't just about this government. Remember, it was commissioned in 2023, so there was a fair bit of looking backwards at the previous government. And what she said was that successive governments have allowed this system to be abused so that there were political appointments made that were hard to justify in some cases, but also that the whole system had ended up developing a reputation for being riven with nepotism, cronyism, jobs for mates, because there were no checks and balances in it. There was no sort of formality to it, no consistency to it. She said Australia's system was the worst example she'd seen from the other countries that are similar that she looked at, the UK, Canada and the like. So she was particularly critical of the way the system is working now. And she said it would be better for ministers and for the public servants and for the public for there to be a more rigid system that is a bit more transparent, had some flexibility but a bit more structure as well.
So let's go to some of the report's recommendations. What were some of the strongest recommendations that she came up with?
Well, Linnell Briggs recommended that there be standalone legislation to oversee this new system because successive governments could otherwise undo the things that she was recommending. And she talked about the Australian Public Service Commission having a kind of pivotal role in managing processes. She said that individual departments and ministers should still be involved in making appointments. And she quite specifically said she wasn't recommending that a central body take over all of the functions of making appointments. That was not practical. She also talked about, but didn't formally recommend, a review of remuneration, that board members generally get paid some kind of stipend. And she did say she has evidence that some public servants had occasionally been paid meeting fees, and she pointed to the Remuneration Tribunal Act and raised the question about whether this was in a breach. Overall, if we sort of take a helicopter view, this is an incredibly detailed report. I suspect it's far more detailed than the government was looking for. And given the background to it, that they sort of were dragged to ordering the review in the first place, I get the feeling they probably thought it was unhelpful. You can imagine they were a bit horrified when they opened the report and saw how detailed, how specific, and how critical it was.
Coming up, the political risk of looking like a hypocrite. Karen, the Jobs for Mates report has finally been made public, and it paints a scathing picture of nepotism within federal governments. What has been this government's response to those accusations?
Well, they've defended their own actions and said that they had taken steps to order the review and to change the system. Katie Gallagher has defended the time it has taken to bring this report into the public domain.
Why did it take so long?
Because the work wasn't completed. You know?
What took so long for the work to be completed?
Well, there was a number of discussions across government, a number of discussions that I had across portfolios. It took longer than expected, but it has been finalised now.
What they've opted to do is a framework that is much more general, much less binding, has advice for ministers, which is better than is there now, but stops a long way short of the specific detailed recommendations that Linnell Briggs made, which were designed, she said, to make sure this system couldn't be undone. Now, there's an argument, and the government makes this argument sort of privately, if not fully in public, that there are aspects of what she recommended that are probably unworkable and impractical, and I suspect that that is true. But you do feel like there might be some middle ground where they could entrench things a bit more specifically, and they've quite deliberately chosen not to do that. The minister was very keen to point back to the previous government and say, look at all the things that they did, point to their poor administration, point to robo-debt and the way that they treated the public and the public's right to know. And she says, we are making leaps and bounds improvements on that, and we've done a lot, and this is much better. But she still says she doesn't accept all of what Linnell Briggs has recommended, that they never committed to accept all of it.
We don't believe, that people should be excluded if they've got the right skill set and go through a process of appointment to a government board. But there are people who leave work in this parliament who do have the right skills and would be an asset on government boards and committees.
I think there are 5 of those recommendations that they've rejected outright, and a number of others that they've adopted sort of in part or in whole. She hasn't yet produced a detailed matrix of which ones she says she has or hasn't accepted. We just have the 14-page document. That's the result.
The government argues that it has already improved the appointment process. Does that assertion stack up in reality though, Karen?
Well, I think the thing is it's hard to know because we see the outcomes with appointments and the names of people who have been appointed to boards. We don't necessarily see the process that has gone into appointing them. And it's important to say that there are often good reasons for appointing people who've got experience in government, maybe former politicians or former public servants, people with good experience who may also have had connections to people in government. And one point that's been made to me about this is that you can't always tell what people's connections are. You may see an appointment made, a name of someone, doesn't ring a bell. You don't know if they are a friend of a minister or somebody with connections that are not visible. So the government has clearly taken some steps to improve the system that we had before. They are implementing this idea of a skills matrix, but you just can't help getting the feeling that they didn't necessarily do it voluntarily and that maybe their hearts weren't quite in it. It wasn't their top priority.
Perish the thought. In a week where the government was defending its record on integrity and transparency, there was an interesting display from the Communications Minister, Annika Wells. She was questioned about spending almost $100,000 on 3 business class flights to New York so she could spruik the social media ban at the UN. How did she defend that, and what did you make of the way she handled the questioning this week?
Well, she spoke at the National Press Club, and I think she didn't handle the questions about those flights particularly well. The stories had emerged in the media the morning of her press club address about the total price tag of these 3 flights. I think it was $94,000, so getting close to $100,000. Even given it was a route in high demand because of the UN meeting, it does seem a lot. And she came to the press club not armed with reasonable answers.
That trip was undertaken as the Minister for Communications, and I would think the people who were there for that UN event who join us in this room today would agree with me that it was incredibly important.
In fact, she was a bit snippy and she brushed away the questions and gave the impression that she thought that journalists were engaged in trivia.
You don't think that was expensive for airfares? Over $94,000?
I've answered your question.
Now, I don't think that's a good way to respond. These little things, they seem like little things. These little things can add up, and they can be the things that cause ministers a real problem if they take hold in the public consciousness and if they start to undermine the ministers and the government's assertions that they're about transparency, accountability, integrity and trust. And if you start undoing that, you're in real trouble.
This is a government that was elected on a platform of transparency and integrity. Do you think this saga and the goings-on of this week make them look like hypocrites?
I think what I would say is when you raise expectations about these things, as Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, and other senior members campaigned on integrity prior to the 2022 election when they defeated the Morrison government, you've got to meet them. If people start to form a picture that you're not meeting the expectations, then they start to question whether you were ever really intending to or whether it was just platitudes to get you into office. So I think that is where the government is, and I think it could be a problem if they don't address it.
And there was a whiff of Yes Minister about the whole thing, was there not?
There was. The thing that it reminded me of all of this was, we've seen some great television shows in the past on transparency and on the way government works, and most recently in this country, Utopia, of course, on the ABC, but its forerunner was Yes Minister from the 1980s, and the first episode of that was called Open Government.
What's wrong with open government? I mean, why shouldn't the public know more about what's going on?
Are you serious?
Well, yes, sir. I mean, it is the Minister's policy, after all.
My dear boy, it's a contradiction in terms. You can be open or you can have government.
But
it's satirical, but those funny shows do speak some truth, right?
Absolutely. Karen, thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
7am is a daily show from Solstice Media. It's made by Atticus Bastow, Ariel Richards, Chris Dengate, Ruby Jones, Sarah McPhee, Travis Evans, Zoltan Fetcho, and me, Daniel James. Our theme music is by Ned Beckley and Josh Hogan of Envelope Audio. You've been listening to 7am. Have a great weekend.